Hello everyone, this is Assistant Professor Ibrahim Taad Ibrahim, faculty member at College of Arts, Iraqi University, Republic of Iraq. I'll be delivering you a topic with reference to scientific translation. It's titled Consecutive Interpreting of English-Arabic Scientific Speeches, Problems and Solutions. First of all, we have to talk about the outline of our today's presentation. We are going to cover the following topics: the introduction, consecutive interpreting definition, features of consecutive interpreting, listening, taking notes, production of a speech in the target language, scientific language, features of scientific language, procedures of interpreting scientific speeches consecutively, strategies of consecutive interpreting of scientific speeches from English into Arabic, clarification, elaborating on vague terms, expansion, defining the acronyms into their own equivalent terms in the target language, and transformational strategy as well. The introduction of our today's presentation: science and technology are two faces of the same coin. Therefore, humans have to pay extraordinary attention to them because they are deeply related to our life on a daily basis. Not to mention that science and technology are developing every second of our life. This is why there are countless number of terms within the domain of science and technology generated. It's important to know how to convey such terms from one language into another. The current presentation is about how to render scientific technological terms from English into Arabic orally via consecutive mode. As for consecutive interpreting definition, it's defined as a process of transferring a speech from one human language into another, one consecutively. It requires a very rich mental repertoire with knowledge, not to mention active memory. There are many steps taken within the process of consecutive interpreting, and these steps are 3 in number. First of all, we have to talk about listening, which is concerned with receiving the source language product. The second step, taking notes, writing down the most important pieces of information, such as names, statistics, years, etc. And the third step is concerned with production of a speech in the target language, delivering a speech in the target language. Scientific language. It's described as a language that can be employed for special purposes. In other words, it's a formalized and codified variety of language used for special purposes within the function of communicating information of a specialist nature at any level in the most economic, precise, and unambiguous terms possible. From a register vantage point, scientific language is concerned with a linguistic variety of a speech community that tends to employ in a certain event for a particular communicative purpose. Speaking of the occupational situation, it will definitely result a distinct linguistic variety. The language resort to in writing a report in a particular field of science is different from that of a literary text. It's worth mentioning that science language can be highlighted as a developed level of layman knowledge due to the fact that all of their concepts and names we are familiar with or employ are originally related to the one or the other branch of science. It goes without saying that there is a far cry between the layman language and expert one to convey the message to a layman clearly. One needs to focus on the language employed by scientists. This is due to the fact that the specialist is something important, therefore their language is something important as well. However, specialization is a relative term that's different from area to one another and individual to another one. Scientific translation and features. Scientific translation is the act of translating documents such as research, academic articles, the results of clinical trials, and more. Any document on a scientific subject into another language. Most scientific documents feature complex terminology. They are often characterized by very specific language used too. The topics may also be extremely specialized. In other words, is essentially a professional skill representing three basic requirements at least: a crystal clear comprehension of the source language, knowledge concerning the subject backed by access to authentic sources of the newest pieces of information, necessary skills to write on the field like an expert. The procedures of interpreting scientific speeches consecutively. There are different means of dealing with scientific speeches when it comes to interpreting them into the target language consecutively. It's known for everyone that the core issue in the scientific text, spoken or written, is terms. In other words, it's composed of scientific terms that matter the intended readers in the target language the most. Therefore, the consecutive interpreter must be armed with certain procedures of conveying such terms into the target language successfully. They are highlighted in the following slide. The procedures are as follows: arranging the topics heard from the SL speaker in the target language. In other words, when the speaker in question talks about something in the SL, the consecutive interpreter must embody his speech and deliver it in the same order. Understanding the intended listener's mentality, the interpreter must know to whom he interprets, experts or laymen. The step helps him to deliver the speech in a way that matches their minds. If the terms found in the body of the speaker's mind are difficult to understand by the listeners, he needs to simplify them so as not to cause any sort of misunderstanding. The third procedure is concerned with avoiding any sort of terminological deletion. Unlike ordinary speeches, where deletion of particular words, redundant one, is acceptable, the scientific speech terms are of great significance. Therefore, it's not advised to delete any term within the process of consecutive interpreting of scientific speeches into a target language. The strategies of consecutive interpreting of scientific speeches from English into Arabic. In fact, I made use of a particular strategies in interpreting a speech titled "Why Children Need Science and Technology" by Netrayuni. She is a TEDx participant, and this lady built her first real science lab in her parents' basement when she was just 14 years old. She went on to study and perform research at University of Toronto, MIT, Caltech. Now she shares her ideas about how to inspire our youth to pursue STEAM, which means science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. This talk was given at a TEDx event using the TED conference format, but independently organized by a local community. The strategies are presented below. The strategy that I made use of in interpreting such a speech presented by Netrayuni. As for the first strategy, it's concerned with clarification. It aims at elaborating on the vague terms. For instance, the term carcinogenic. It requires explanation. This is why interpreters must be able to define it in a simple way during the second step of consecutive interpreting, titled Taking Notes. The second strategy is concerned with expansion. It's about defining the acronyms and words, word formations such as blending, compounding into their equivalent terms in the target language. There are two important words, Wi-Fi and STEAM. These terms are found in the body of Netra's speech, presented in TEDx event. As for the former, the consecutive interpreter has to put it in English for the first time in order to make it clear. In other words, when the SL speaker highlights what does Wi-Fi mean for the first time, the TL version should be like ماذا يعني الواي-فاي, so as to take the second step, which is about expanding the word form, which is blending and compounding for the TL listeners as خدمة الإنترنت اللاسلكي. The same is true of the latter, which is concerned with STEAM. The consecutive interpreter must follow the first step as it was applied in the first example mentioned above, and the SL speaker herself explains constituents of the acronym. STEAM means science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. Therefore, the consecutive interpreter should transfer her elaboration into TL successfully. The third strategy that I adopted and I invented, in fact, it's concerned with transformational strategy. This is a brand new strategy employed mostly in interpreting. It's after defining the SL term for the first time, then making use of the ordinary and understandable equivalent in the TL later. This strategy can be applied to both acronyms STEAM and Wi-Fi. Since these two terms are mentioned repeatedly in the body of the speech by the speaker, the consecutive interpreter in question can elaborate on them at the beginning of the TL speech, the target version, in question, and then he sticks to the transliterated versions when the listeners became familiar with them. This strategy is useful because it saves time and effort and reduces mental pressure that the interpreter faces during interpreting sessions. And these are the conclusions that I have arrived at. First, it's concluded that the scientific terms are too important to be omitted from speeches during consecutive interpreting sessions into the TL. Number two, consecutive interpreters must be armed with different procedures concerning the process as well as the context of the text spoken he deals with during interpreting process to avoid any sort of misunderstanding. 3. They also have to follow new strategies or invent certain ones for the sake of reducing pressures, saving time and efforts, and produce an appropriate product in the TL. And these are the references that I made use of in my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and watching my presentation.